My name is Bree Fowler. I'm a tech writer for the Associated Press, and I spend most of my time writing about cybersecurity, among other things. To my right, we have Jonathan Couch, Vice President of Strategy for ThreatQuotient. John J. Prisco, CEO and co-founder of Triumphant. To my left, John Shear, CEO and co-founder of Darklight. And Dr. Danny Rogers, CEO of Terbium Labs. So we will get started right away with questions. First to you, Jonathan Couch. So how much do companies and organizations really need to care about the dark web? Is this something security operations should be handling, or are there other ways to deal with the problems?
Well, thank you. I hope everybody can hear me. I'm not sure if the mic is going to work properly. I think one of the first things we're going to talk a little bit today, hopefully about kind of what the dark web really is. I don't think it's well defined. In the whole area of threat intelligence overall isn't necessarily all that well defined. But in my mind, the dark web can be utilized by organizations, but as with anything you're doing in security operations, you need to identify your strategy to figure out what is it you're trying to do and what is it you're trying to accomplish. And then, as in the government and military, they set up priority intelligence requirements. What are they trying to do? What are the requirements for intel to meet those needs? And then go out and get the right sources of intelligence and information in order to meet those requirements. And I think the dark web falls into that category. A lot of people sort of think that within the dark web, all the answers to all of their security problems, lie somewhere within. If we can just get access, if we can just have people go to the right locations. And I think it's more important for you to take a look at it and be able to say, all right, what kind of requirements and what kind of information and intelligence do we need that's not being satisfied by our current sources? That might be satisfied by some of these forums that you need special authentication to, that you have to go through anonymization tactics in order to reach. So to be able to take a look at that and then figure out what kind and what's the content, format, and frequency of the intelligence and information you'll be pulling out of those forums and those locations to figure out how it plugs into security operations and how you can actually action it. How can you communicate what you've gained from those intel sources up to your management, up to the commanders in the military on that side. And just make sure that you're approaching the problem with a strategy in place rather than just that, let me run out and grab a bunch of information because it's the deep dark web and sounds cool and we should probably be getting information from there.
Okay, thanks. To John Prisco, is there a cyber dossier or collection of PII being collected on the dark web, and what indications are there that this is true? In light of this, what makes the recent healthcare and government breaches so dangerous?
Well, I'll start by answering that question with asking all of you a question. How many in this room are part of the OPM breach? I am. Good percentage of you. So my wife and I are. We're 2 for 2. And of course, you all got an identity theft service, which of course they told everybody was good for 3 years. So, I do think that our adversaries are smart enough to wait and then use that information. But definitely there is a dossier being put together. It's sort of like solving a giant puzzle. And I believe that the nation states are really creating a large organization chart, perhaps the organization chart of the mother of all organization charts. And what we really have to do is make sure that we protect ourselves better. And unfortunately, the techniques that have been put in place to protect PII haven't been good enough. And I think that all goes back to the speed with which both commercial and government entities respond. Some of the procurement processes are so lengthy that by the time something's deployed, it's obsolete. So if you don't want your information on the dark web, you should start by protecting it better. And I think some of the new technologies that are being put forth are going to make it harder for people to steal that information. But I do think that most of us in this room have something to worry about.
Okay. Bree, do you mind if I jump in really quickly? I want to just clarify, or not clarify, but sort of build upon two of those points. One is, I completely agree that there is undoubtedly, a repository, a very organized repository of sensitive personal information being built at the nation-state level. I mean, that's what OPM was about. Many people are positing that's what the massive Yahoo breach was about. At the same time, there's kind of a distinction, if we're talking about the dark web, what, say, a nation, a foreign nation is building in terms of an intelligence dossier on sensitive individuals is not necessarily going to show up on the dark web, so to speak. I mean, the dark web is, again, this comes down to how you define it. It really is a marketing term, unfortunately. But if you define it as kind of the sort of the nasty parts of the internet where people trade in stolen information, often when things are stolen at the nation state level, most of that information doesn't end up for sale, right? That ends up being in the coffers of the intelligence organization that stole it, right? That said, an interesting thing about this massive Yahoo breach is that that some of the information did end up for sale. In fact, that's kind of part of how it was revealed, right? And so sometimes, the line between nation state and financially motivated criminal actors is actually pretty gray, and often the financially motivated actors are sometimes working on behalf of or selling information to the nation state. And so there's kind of a gray area, right? It's not necessarily that all the OPM data is on the dark web somewhere. In fact, most of the research has shown that it isn't, right? But there is there is some overlap of things that are stolen for kind of state level motivations can be, some of that data can be monetized on the side by the people doing the stealing. I also want to make one more point about defense, and that is, I think personally, and this may be in contrast to what some other people are saying here, but we are in an era where defense, we like to say, is while still necessary, no longer sufficient, and that you sort of have to approach your security posture from a perspective of not a matter of if we're going to be breached or can we prevent it, but when is it going to happen and what are we going to do in response and how are we going to know and plan accordingly. I think that's the new era, especially in light of these ultra sophisticated state actors or even organized crime, which has access to state level toolkits. That it's important to think about the problem like that. So, thanks. Sorry to interrupt.
Okay, to you, John. Can we talk about the life cycle of an attack and how this has changed over time? Assuming organizations are monitoring the dark web, what can they do with this knowledge, and what should be done? What should they be doing to monitor?
A couple of things. One is as far as the life cycle of an attack. It's also called the kill chain. I'm sure you're all familiar with that. And different organizations have different definitions of that. But in the early days of cyber, the kill chain was pretty much 2 steps. It's like they figured out how to get to your machine, and then they did something nasty. That was ancient, years ago, right? Now it's so much more sophisticated. And you talk about offense and defense. Now you have to really model the attack, the stages of an attack in a much more sophisticated way, as if, and I agree with Annie, as if they're going to get in, right? Okay, well, how they do that? So the first step is like they do reconnaissance and figure out how do I get in, and so they get through the firewall or whatever, they get in. The next is like, okay, I'm in. How do I weaponize? Now, how do I basically? I'm going to do an attack, and I've got to get the right weapon in there. Then you're in there, and then you have to deliver that weapon. Then you're going to find the vulnerability, find the exploit, find some vulnerability and get the exploit in there. And then they go grab control and command or other techniques. Then they actually execute, and then they maintain. Now this could be done in a day. It could be done in 7 months. It could be done in 2 years. There's no, you don't know. But the advantage as far as what we can do is using the dark web, I would say it's just the same things you would do as far as your organization goes. If you're protecting your organization, one of the key things you need to do is understand your enterprise and the context of the business you're operating in, and so that you get an idea and you want to model what normal behavior is and how should it look. and then look for any of the movements that occur in anywhere in that kill chain and identify them prior to them getting to the end stage. So you do that. I would argue, well, in order to defend, you really have to know your enemy and what are their techniques and what are they doing. And they might actually have like personas, certain groups attack in a certain way and in different ways anywhere along that kill chain or in that life cycle of the attack. So knowing that, you want to know how they operate. One of the places they operate and where they actually have, it's a marketplace for these tools, for people, for techniques, for weapons. The dark web is, in some cases, it's a marketplace for any of the tools prior to the actual execution. It might be trading tools. But often what we do is we see the after the fact. It's like the commerce of selling or trading your IP or your financial information, and that's at the tail end. The dark web, a lot of the things occur way early. It's where the bad guys are hanging out. But fortunately, it's actually where some of the good guys are hanging out too. So I think you want to be able to model the context of your adversary and where they're operating and how they're operating just as closely as you monitor your own enterprise in the context of your business. You have to look at both. Otherwise, you're flying blind. They'll just get in there, and it's always after the fact. You don't want to be the one that finds out, opening up the Wall Street Journal, that, oh, your stuff is for sale. Okay? That's not when you want to find out. You need to monitor and understand what's going on at the dark web. It's just a reality. You can't fly blind.
Great. And Danny, automation has become huge in tech, and it's become huge for cybercrime as well. Cybercrime becomes easier when you can use bots and you can just attack and just kind of let the tech do the work for you. Is there a way for companies to kind of battle back with their own form of automation, especially when you're talking about mid-market companies that may not have the resources of the huge investment banks and financial services companies?
Yeah, that's actually a really good question because there's two pieces to that, especially like you said in the middle market where the resources are limited, right? So if you think about JP Morgan spent $250 million last year on security, right? That makes them a hard target. Now, one can argue how hard of a target they were when they got hit with this penny stock scheme, right? But I think I would say now they're probably a pretty hard target, right? And so in the era of automated attacks, and we see this a lot in the data that we collect, right? So we collect a massive amount of data off the dark web. We analyze it. We have sensors triggered whenever we see signs of new data dumps being put up or posted or things like that. And one thing we see a lot of mid-market companies being hit. And the reason is all the attacks are automated these days. And it's not just botnets, right? But you think about Shodan and all these tools make it very easy for me to just scan the entire internet for certain vulnerabilities, say an unauthenticated MongoDB instance, right? And just automatically deploy the right exploit against it, pull back that data. Why would I, as an attacker, spend the time and the effort going after JP Morgan, potentially drawing the attention of big law enforcement and things like that, when I could just set up a bunch of anonymous machines to go and deploy automated techniques against, say, a few hundred smaller credit unions that have no defenses, relatively speaking, and pull back the same volume of information. I did the same amount of work. Fewer people care at the top of the kind of in the kind of mainstream media and law enforcement, and I get the same benefit, right? And so, in the era of automated attacks, what we're seeing is this massive shift from going after the big players to these broad kind of diaspora almost of attacks against middle market organizations, whether it's low regional restaurant chains, smaller retailers, mid-market finance, things like that. Anyone who has a vulnerable point of sale or customer information system or something like that they don't have the resources to protect at the same level that the kind of Fortune 100, Fortune 500 have. And so how do you counter that? Well, the approach we take is deploying a sort of analogous automation on the intelligence gathering side. So we have a massively automated system that goes and collects this information from the dark web, and we can tell these mid-market companies, your data just popped up here 3.5 minutes ago. Did you know that? This is exactly what was involved. And by the way, because it's so automated, it can be priced at a price point that you can afford, right? Which has not traditionally been the case for this kind of bespoke, often human-powered dark web intelligence, right? When you have to go collect it by hand and read the internet by hand, that's a very labor-intensive process that doesn't scale very easily, and so you're essentially outsourcing human beings to do this, and it becomes very expensive. So by deploying automation on the intelligence gathering side, you can really counter the automation being deployed against you, especially in the middle market.
Great.
Hey, Bree,
Yes.
can I ask a question real quick?
Yeah, sure.
So, well, first off, for everybody standing in the back, there is seats up front here, so all the midshipmen standing in the back can feel free to come on up and join us. The Army's the only one in the front row. You guys got to show up. I like the Air Force, what can I say? So just as a real quick, just to get a feel for the room, how many people here utilize cyber threat intelligence as part of their daily job, as part of their security operations today? So not a lot of users of cyber threat intel here. All right, so if I define the dark web as, you can treat it as kind of like the black market of intelligence and targeting within the internet. But not only that black market, but let's add an extra layer onto it. Is that black market that you have to have some level of vetting to get into? I often describe it at Eyesight Partners, the company I helped start about 10 years ago. We used to define the dark web as those forums where there's a lot of Russian hacker forums that are hacker for hire. It's a by name, invitation only kind of thing. I mean, you got to be known to get access and know what's going on in those kinds of forums. So if I go further to define the dark web as that kind of access to really, you have to be vetted in order to get access to it. How many people here are leveraging or think they could leverage the kind of intel that would come out of an organization like that? All right. So the bigger question, why do people here care about the dark web? I think it's important to understand, kind of what it is you're looking for as an organization. And to go back to my earlier statements, what kind of intelligence are you looking for? And then where can you find it? It's really important to do that before you dedicate time and resources to any particular area that you're going to go and move toward to try and answer whatever your intelligence requirements and security requirements are.
I think it'd be kind of a good time to just back up and kind of talk about what is the dark web. A lot of people see the dark web as that, kind of marketplace where you can buy anything from guns to the latest 0-day for Adobe. So basically, what is it more than that? How big is the dark web? And what's kind of the reality of the situation? I throw that to whoever wants to take it.
Yeah, thanks for the question, because I think it's probably the first question we should all start with on this subject, just because it is so ill-defined, and the kind of, there's a big gap between what it really is, depending on how you define it, and what the sort of mainstream mythology about it is, right? So there's a couple of pervasive myths about it. One is that, and probably have seen the iceberg picture. In fact, I think that iceberg stock art is like the most highly licensed stock art in the history of stock art. But this idea that the internet is the top part of the iceberg, and then the dark web is all of it underneath. And the truth is, at least from our measure and the how we define it, that diagram's kind of upside down. If you look at the number, I mean, there's any measure you want. I mean, let's start with the number of Tor hidden services. So for starters, how many people in the room are familiar with Tor, the anonymization service? Excellent. All right, so we're already like 3/4 of the way there. So the number of Tor hidden services, I think at last count, was like 60 or 70,000 total .onion domains, and only about 10 to 15% of those actually return any meaningful content. The rest are C2 servers, or when the Ricochet chat service went up, that sets up a hidden service for every user. The number exploded that week and has only just now started to come back down. At any given time, there's about 7,500 volunteer Tor relay nodes running, and only about 2 million Tor users connected, right? So that's one measure of how big is the dark web, although we define it to be much broader than Tor hidden services. It's, as you say, hacker for hire forums, it's carding markets, it's pace sites, it's drug marketplaces, all these places where you can buy guns or and then even some particularly nasty parts of the internet that law enforcement pays special attention to that we won't talk about because it's just too disgusting. And so what we, even if you define it that way, right, compared to the, couple of billion domains, there's about 1 billion registered domains on the internet, and the multiple, maybe 2 or 3 billion internet users, right? You're still 3 or 4 orders of magnitude smaller than the internet as a whole. So in many ways, that iceberg is upside down, right? The dark web is not this sort of infinite, as Bree kind of said before, this infinite abyss of information. It's relatively compact compared to the internet. That said, there's a new paste on Pastebin every 2 minutes. And so if you are trying to employ a human being to keep up with this part of the internet, you're not going to be able to, whether it's discovering new hidden services or reading all the content to see if any of it's yours. Like, that process needs to be automated. And so it's not that big, but it's also bigger than a team of individuals can probably keep up with as a whole. And then to your other question, how you define it, right? I mean, there's the Tor hidden services, there's I2P sites. I2P is kind of they claim it's the next version of Tor. It's not really. It's written in Java for starters, which is a big mistake. And there's not really much on it. But it's, we define it to be larger than that. I like to call it even broader than the hacker for hire forums, just the nasty parts of the internet, right? So there are clones of Amazon.com that specialize in selling drugs, right? There are sites that sell malware. There are whole, clear web hosted e-commerce sites that you can go buy stolen credit cards off of, and they have themed sales like Black Friday sale and Christmas sale. They really do. You want to go look the day after Thanksgiving? Well, ask us. We'll send you some screenshots. The day after Thanksgiving, and you'll see Black Friday sales on stolen credit cards. So I think it's broader than just kind of what is canonically defined as the narrow view, because there's so much rich information out there to be able to tell everything from trend analysis to identifying payment card breaches, to identifying breach organizations very quickly. And I think it's important to monitor the whole thing. But it's a broader place than people realize, but it's also not as massive as the media kind of sometimes makes it out to be.
Great. So because this is so, an area that a lot of people and a lot of businesses aren't super familiar with, how can organizations stay informed and educated on what goes on the darknet and the dynamics of how it works and how it's being used? Is this something that you can do internally, or does this usually mean outsourcing for a lot of companies?
I think that a very good way of staying informed is to become a member of an ISAC. So, there's the Financial Services ISAC and National Health ISAC. And when you look at the type of information that these organizations are trying to preserve, you realize just how valuable that information is. Financial information is valuable, but healthcare information is more valuable. And the type of stuff that the OPM lost is really valuable because it's, you can always cancel a credit card. You can't cancel the last 10 places you lived and the last 15 countries you visited and everything else about you, your social security number. But being able to share intelligence and sharing it rapidly, we've gone through lots of stages in the cybersecurity world. We were kind of caught flat-footed with organizations that really were just happy to have an antivirus product that said, I quarantined that file, you're good, goodbye. You don't really need a staff to figure that out. The antivirus product did it for you. Then we graduated into areas like threat intelligence platforms, but the problem with that type of sharing is that, first of all, it is proof by exhaustion, so you have to have every possible piece of malware in this forum, and it has to get there at internet speed. So if it doesn't get there quickly, and if it isn't all-encompassing, you'll still be the person who ends up with being the zero-day focus of an attack. But now what we're able to do is to automate the threat intelligence. So with machine learning and artificial intelligence, we can play all of these variants into an artificial intelligence engine. And I was at a talk the other day where the CISO from Palo Alto Networks said that, you know, they have a consortium of sharing out on the West Coast. They're trying to get lots of companies to join that and to be contributors. But they say that they believe there's only about 1,000 types or families of malware. I'm not sure that's true, but let's say it is for the moment. If you can categorize, all right, maybe there are 10 million variants of each family, but if you can categorize those things and recognize them, now you can start doing more than just detection and remediation. Now you can start doing prevention. So I think sharing is a key to preventing these types of attacks in the future. And we should see more of that and more machine learning and more automation.
I have just to add to this a little bit, you know, we're talking about, and I completely agree, it's all about sharing the threat intelligence, and I mentioned earlier, it's like you can't fly blind. We have this whole new level of threat intelligence you need, and that is the actual activity on the dark web to monitor what's going on. In this morning's keynote, Admiral Rogers mentioned, like, what's the biggest problem, and it's the workforce. So even with all this information, and yes, we can automate a fair amount of it, at the end of the day, you have to have a human on the loop, in the loop and on the loop. They have to be viewing this and they have to be figuring this out. So if we can come up with common ways, and there's a lot of initiatives to do this, common ways of sharing information, whether it's threat intel, whether it's malware information, it's dark web information, and then create kind of a common data model or some way of sharing the information, because there's no way we're going to get 1 million cyber analysts showing up at the doorstep tomorrow. But if we can figure out how we can actually create a common way of sharing information and making it actionable, and that's why we should really leverage a lot of these different tools. The artificial intelligence, that's some of the things that we're doing, and the machine learning. There's lots of things occurring, and that have quite honestly been used in the normal course of e-commerce. There's some very sophisticated technologies out there that are showing up at, that's why you get all these ads and everything else. That same technology has to move into the cybersecurity arena, and quickly, so that there's a way to basically force multiply the workforce. Otherwise, we'll never catch up.
Yeah, if I might echo that last point, I mean, a lot of the stuff that we do is based on these big data technologies that probably 5-6 years ago didn't exist. I mean, I don't think we could have built our company if we didn't have these cloud and Hadoop and those sorts of things. And that's definitely one way to help multiply the force, is these big data analytics that can really help get ahead of this. I mean, we see routinely, for example, payment card breaches that you would never be able to find unless you could aggregate the data across the marketplaces and then pull out using an analytics, because it's purposely obfuscated, and so you have to employ some computational techniques to pull it back out. I think that it's definitely true that you have to have people. But the goal is, as you say, to make people more efficient, so better use what you have, both in terms of cost and in terms of that volume of data. And so yeah, I agree that technology can be your friend here. So.
One of the comments I would make is, as you're looking at ways to automate, and as we move into machine learning and AI and a lot of these new technologies that people are trying to test and prove out, I would throw out there, one of the keys to threat intelligence, and there's been a lot in the market when people talk about threat intelligence. I'm kind of an intelligence purist when I look at things, and intelligence has a very specific meaning, and you have to use intelligence to drive prioritization, to drive decision making, and we have to move along the lines of how we're defining actionability, because right now a lot of people define actionability as an indicator, an IP address, a domain name, a URL, an MD5 hash, and you can't really prioritize or make a decision based upon that. I could hand you 100,000 IP addresses and say make a decision. I could hand you a knife and say this is bad. Does that help you do anything differently than you're doing it right now? I think what you need to do is you need to have some context around that threat intelligence. And it's one of the allures of the dark web. If I can go out there and I can interact with a forum, interact with the users, and I can actually figure out and define who's using it, what's their motivation, what's their intent, what's their capability, what kind of infrastructure are they utilizing. I get a lot more information around it that now allows me to make a smart, informed decision. It allows me to prioritize the work so that as I have those 100,000 IP addresses that are coming at me that everybody says is bad, I can now take a look and say, well, you know what? I'm an e-commerce system, or I'm a retail facility. I run point of sale systems where I take in people's credit cards. These IP addresses are related to point of sale malware attacks. I now have enough information that I can make a decision versus just a long list of technical information that doesn't allow me to do much. So I would also recommend that as you're going out there and you're taking a look at things to monitor the dark web. I mean, even in the nature of the question, how is it that you can go about and keeping an eye on it? What do you need to keep an eye on? That requires a little bit of context. And I would leverage third-party providers and partners and organizations that are out there that have access and insight and have found a way to scale their access and insight into the dark web to be able to provide you the right information, but the right information in a way that you can actually change your operations and make smart decisions.
Yeah, I wanted to echo that last point too. Sorry, I keep jumping in, but that idea of actionability, right? Giving you 100 or 100,000 IP addresses isn't necessarily actionable, but like, what if you could get, okay, your stuff just showed up here at this time? I mean, there's been cases, well-documented cases in finance, for example, where getting an early tip that this information is what was just posted literally within minutes or hours, right, gives you enough information to kick off that process. And the action that's most often missing, that's most delayed in the business right now, is that kickoff of my remediation, my incident response and remediation process, right? The one statistic that's been perpetually getting worse over the years has been that time to detection, right? We know how to remediate, we know how to do the investigation, we just don't know when we should kick it off. We don't know when we have a problem. And so that's where this kind of dark web data can tell you, okay, now is the time to do it, and before anyone else finds out, or before you've had a chance to monetize it, or before these cards can have fraudulent transactions on them, or whatever the kind of damage time is. The earlier you can find that out, the more likely you can mitigate most, if not all, the damage. And then one other point about sharing, because I think there's a lot of talk about sharing, and we are obviously big proponents in theory of sharing, but one thing we found just in the market is that, especially when you're talking about dark web data and potential breaches and things like that, people don't want to share. I mean, you're talking about stuff that before people didn't even want to know. Now they're okay knowing, but they don't want to tell anyone, right? And so we balance this a lot because we see a lot of sensitive data, and we have ways of approaching companies that have been breached that are that try to make sure we respect as much sort of propriety as possible. And so I think it's just an uphill battle of trying to get people to share in a way that doesn't expose them, whether to legal liability, brand liability, things like that. I don't think we've come up with an answer for that as an industry.
Well, and I think this is probably a large, primarily government audience. I mean, sources and methods. It comes down, you have to protect where you're getting the information from also. So there's that balance of, yes, you want to share as much as possible, but you also want to protect your sources and methods so you don't lose that insight into where you're getting information. And a lot of the traditional government processes are now finding their way into commercial industry to where they're trying to find that balance and figure out what the way ahead is.
Okay, I have a few more questions, but does anyone in the audience have any questions? You're more than welcome to ask. Yeah.
Is there a concern of having too many good guys in the dark web as the interest increases, getting threat intelligence just from that source?
So, do you mind if I?
Yeah, we should repeat the question.
Repeat the question.
So just to repeat the question, is there a concern about having too many good guys out there? And there actually are a lot of cases where forums, a lot of the supposedly worst forums out there ended up being like 80% of law enforcement and good people out there sitting on the forums. So we were spying on each other and reporting on each other. It was interesting. I got called in multiple times to the FBI where it's sort of like, are you this person here? Maybe, I don't know. And so you do have to be very careful of that, because once everybody focuses in on an area, it's like, oh, I know this really good area that nobody else is hanging out in. Meanwhile, everybody else knows about that same place. So you do have to be careful about that. But a lot of times the traditional intelligence process, dual sourcing, vetting of sources and those kinds of things, will eventually lead you to the right conclusion. If you have good analysts, if you have good collectors out there, they know the right places to go, and they know the process to go through in order to determine, all right, am I actually looking off of what another good guy is doing, or am I actually interacting with the people that I need to find? At the same time, I will say, and Danny could probably expand on this more, but there are still plenty of places out there that aren't really all that well known and that do specialize in such unique kind of information. There's not going to be, all the good guys are just in listen mode. They're not really in participation in active mode. So you can weed out some of the better intel from that perspective.
If I may, do you mind if I just finish building on this one question here, because I think it's important to point out a couple key points. One is, I think you're exactly right. It's a valid question of, are there too many good, is it actually really as bad, or is it seem as bad because there's just populated, by a lot of spy on spy type stuff? The fact is, I think that given the volume of information and given the legal requirements around doing this work as a good guy, so to speak, or as a commercial company, that there are a lot of places that are being watched. There are a lot, especially in certain areas, weapons, human trafficking. A lot of it is law enforcement activity, sting operations, and things like that. But there is just a massive amount of volume of actual real stuff out there. I mean, whether it's, like I said, at any given time we're probably tracking 500,000 stolen credit cards, and we don't even bother with drugs just because it's so expensive. It's so extensive. I think a bigger problem on this part of the internet is that there is no honor among thieves, and a huge amount of what's out there is fake. It's a lot of scams to steal Bitcoin. There's tons of noise out there in terms of thief on thief activity is probably more prevalent than kind of spy on spy activity.
Yeah, along the lines of this question is like, are there too many good guys or too many bad guys? Is at the end of the day, this is all about human nature and people. All of these transactions are occurring because of some person or some entity that they're part of is trying to do something either good or something bad. One of the dangerous things that I believe are out there from the dark web is if I had a friend of mine that's been working some areas that are pretty intense, and they're more worried about what they're calling the gray hats. It's because what occurs, because it is human nature, if you're working on the good side or you're working on the bad side, and if you know the techniques are both, people go bad. I mean, there's a big issue with insider threat. I mean, and either it's an actual insider or it's someone disguised as an insider. That occurs both on within your networks and also in the dark web. It's by design in the dark web that you don't know what side you're on. So it's an area that just to be aware of, that it's a scary place, and it's not hard to get recruited, and the pay is much better.
I'm not sure.
So
lower overhead.
well, we're talking about good guys as well. I mean, the darknet is also used by democracy activists, journalists, people who work for companies overseas where the countries may not quite have the same protections for civil liberties and intellectual property as the United States does. Is that valid in the state? And how much of the dark web is those kinds of good guys these days?
That's actually a really good question, because I think there's one of the other pervasive myths, and there was a study done recently. Sorry, we want to get to the next question, but that there's a survey done. Say, should we just shut the dark web down? Well, first of all, what does that even mean? I mean, it's a volunteer sort of, a set of volunteers running open source software. Like, there's nothing to shut down. I mean, you have to turn the internet off, right? But the truth is, it's not all bad, and in fact, it has a very strong place in the free speech protection, movement, and in places like the Arab Spring, it had a pretty strong role. And in fact, people don't realize that the Tor project gets a significant amount of its funding from the U.S. government, right, in support of those free speech activities. And we're actually, I'll give you a little preview. We're about to release some research, and one of the interesting tidbits in our categorization of content across the dark web, over half of it is perfectly benign and legal. So this myth that it's all nasty stuff, is just not true. I mean, some of it's silly stuff, right? Some of it's conspiracy theory websites and things like that. But it's not illegal. It's just stuff people want to protect via from censorship or from monitoring and things like that, or host anonymously. And so I think it's important to point out that the anonymization technologies involved here are sort of ethically neutral, and it's really what they're used for that is really where the kind of the judgment happens.
Okay. Do we have more questions?
So John mentioned earlier about the sharing of information between companies is not growing as fast. So I want to be a little more specific, and it's a two-part question. What about the vendors, the security vendors, the security manufacturers, the security agencies around the world? Are they collaborating or joining forces to share information more readily than what we're seeing in the commercial space or even between agencies?
Generally not. I mean, this attempt to share information is the beginning, I think, of companies sharing their technologies. But I mean, let's face it, we're all competing for the same dollars. We all have different approaches. But it's a good start. If you're a member of this group, you have to provide something like 1,000 new variants a week in order to be a member in good standing. So, having that information is better than not, but most of these companies are for profit and are not going to coalesce into one great solution.
Well, I think it's absolutely important that we do start sharing. I do work for another company. I'm not going to do commercials, but we have over 2 billion sensors out, and we actually share a lot of information. But to that point, with that information that you gather and the remediation steps you take, right? It seems like we're not looking at the whole picture, right? I'm old enough to remember the NIMDA virus, right? You remember how insidious that was. You go and take it off of one server, and lo and behold, it was on 3 or 4 different servers, right? So when we do these remediation attempts, we're not looking at the whole picture. We're not looking at the mobile component that's so pervasive today, the east-west situation that we're looking at today. So what part of this effort around bringing these companies together and talking about a cooperative security fabric, not just a point mediation or type of solution?
I think there's a few key things. There's a lot of components that go into good information sharing that are out there that we need to keep in mind. Not a lot of the vendors necessarily have a lot of contextual and good threat intelligence from the perspective of you could share it around, but within security operations, a lot of times that can just create more noise. And it'll, the SIMs will be going off and all your sensors will be going off and everything's talking a lot more because now you've pushed out a lot more data there. And it's up to the organizations then to have to sift through that and figure out, okay, what do I care about? And which one, how do I prioritize these and what do I work on? So there's that aspect of it that I think a lot of the vendors haven't done it because they're not running the actual networks that are being attacked. A lot of the information sharing, the solid information sharing networks that are being set up are based off of, if you are an organization that's been targeted and you've seen something on your network, that's the information I need you to share. Hey, I have actually seen this attack. And so that my old boss used to say, the first company's reactive is the next company's proactive. So we just need somebody in here to take one for the team, but then tell everybody else about it. And while nobody really likes to hear that, that's kind of the situation we're in. That's the first step from moving from reactive to becoming proactive, is by sharing that information out there and trying to leverage it. Now, just by the fact that somebody's already been breached by or has seen that on their network, makes it a somewhat of a reactive step already, but at the same time, it gets companies used to, hey, listen, I've seen this out there, I've verified that this is something that's real, let me share it out. And eventually we can get to that over the horizon kind of information sharing to where now we're saying, hey, listen, I have operations in Romania, we've seen these kinds of things around the network out there, I wanted to let everybody else know about it. We can move down, just like they have the kill chain for us as organizations as we're being attacked, our adversaries, they have a business model. They're trying to produce product, sell product, and make money, whether we like it or not. That's what they're doing. So how do we inject risk into their business model like they're injecting risk into ours? And it's by understanding what their business model is. It's by getting in the middle of it and figuring out, all right, at what point are they, and trying to get to them before they actually show up inside of our networks.
I think the vendor community is still grasping at the best solution. And there's a whole category of product now called orchestration that's come together because most large companies are running 50 or so point solutions, and how in the world can you make sense of 50 different products, running all at once, alerting thousands of times a day? It's no information at all. So I do think that as time has gone on and we've graduated from antivirus to the FireEye type products with sandboxes and virtualization, containerization, we're heading toward a solution. So rather than these companies cooperating, which I don't think they will, I think that the competition is going to drive us to better and better solutions. And I do think that the answer is going up the stack in machine learning, because we're faced with a problem that cries out for automation. I mean, you can have all the incident responders you want, but people are just not able to figure this out. I mean, you're talking about compute power that 5 years ago would be considered supercomputer level. We now have to look at that much data to figure out what's going on. So I do think that there's a lot of investment in this area. Billions of dollars are flowing into it each year. So the competition is going to drive us to a better and better answer, and automation and machine learning will be part of that solution, I believe.
Really quickly, one point to add on what he said is that in sharing information is one piece, but I think just interoperability of all these tools is another one. Right? As you said, there's kind of every CISO shop has a hairball of 50 different solutions, or more than that in many cases. And I think one of the challenges these days is they don't all talk to each other, and partly because there's no kind of standard interface for these things. And I don't think we're going to get to a standard interface anytime in the immediate future. So I would just recommend everybody demand that their vendors have APIs and have ways to connect their tools together, because I think that especially as you're talking automation and sharing and things like that, all that's enabled when you have tools that can talk to each other. And so, in demanding that your vendors have those sorts of interfaces, I think is vital. And I know it's been a big it's been a big help to our clients, and it's been really it's the only way it's going to work with these hairballs of solutions.
And I'll put another twist on this. It's like, what if all the sharing was occurring and in real time? We have a bigger problem. Right? It's like, okay, now I have yet more information. It's back to making that information and turn it into more knowledge, and how do you do it? So it's the advent of these new tools, machine learning, neural networks, artificial intelligence, inference engines, and reasoning engines, and agents and things like this. Those things have to evolve quickly to be able to do something if there was such a world that everyone actually was sharing information and not being afraid that they're sharing private things and so on. But it's back to the API is a good first step, but then once you get the information, it's just like now, what do you do with it? And if you don't have the personnel and the workforce to actually do the human reasoning, you're no better than you were before.
It does come back to the human capital.
It's all about.
Anybody else have questions?
I believe Mr. Couch stated that at some point in time, the FBI came and asked, was that you there?
Yep.
So how do you protect yourself when you're inside the dark web, from the FBI side of the house and from the side of the house of those who are on the dark web, going to prevent you from doing what you're doing?
Yep. So, I mean, a lot of that just goes into how a lot of these organizations are set up and how you operate. You know, the rule we always had at iSight, and kind of, you know, I'll say the agreement that we had with FBI and law enforcement around the world was always the fact that we had to operate legally in whatever country we were operating. You know, as a side note, iSight had offices in 20 different countries. So it gave us a lot of leeway to be able to do what we needed to do. But at the end of the day, it came down to being able to stand up and say, listen, I did nothing to further a criminal enterprise, you know, and here's what we're doing and how we went about doing it. It's that open, you know, kind of conversation. So protecting yourself from law enforcement is kind of the easy solution. You know, protecting yourself from the guys that are operating on the dark web, that really gets into just, you know, standard tradecraft. Making sure that you're protecting yourself and you're going about it in the right way, which is also why I often recommend, a lot of organizations and commercial companies I talk to often say, you know, listen, we want to get in there. There's some information in the dark web that we need. You know, I build shoes for a living, and there's, you know, underground forums that are specializing in stealing my shoe designs and putting them out there. So, you know, I want to get out into the dark web and I want to know what these guys are saying. Well, all right, but it's going to take a lot for you to do that. There's a lot of investment that needs to go into doing it. You can't just, you know, load up Tor on your computer and be like, all right, I'm in there, sold, step 3, profit. You know, you have to actually go about it. You have to have people that know what they're doing. You have to have a way to be able to support that. So my recommendation is always, if that's an area you want to get into, you know, engage a third party that knows what they're doing. But because you don't want to end up being targeted as a company. If you as a company or organization go out and do it, you know, if you're found out, you can get targeted. We got targeted all the time. We got targeted by Anonymous. I got targeted by the Chinese. I got targeted by the Russians. I mean, you know, everybody and their mother. I was part of the OPM breach. I mean, everybody knows my social. You can probably Google it right now. Have at it. My credit's horrible. And so, you know, but you have to realize that going out there, that, you know, what you're getting into, engage those companies and organizations that know how to do it in the right way, and then can protect themselves, and also put you at a little bit of a distance from it. So you can benefit from that knowledge and intelligence, but you don't have to be the ones, you know, actively doing it. It's a huge cost to do it up yourself with, you know, fairly minimal gain when you can engage other companies that provide those kinds of services.
Okay, so kind of tied in with that, you know, even a few years ago, cybersecurity was a tough sell for CIOs and CISOs to make to the C-suite. You know, why it was important to spend money, why it was important to bring in outside companies to do this. The dark web kind of takes this to another level when it comes to executives not being familiar with it. How can people in cybersecurity and at companies convey to the C-suite the importance of this and the importance of spending money on things like this? For you.
So, sorry, I won't be the only one talking. So my big thing, and it's funny because not self-promotion, but I do have a blog coming out on this because I get asked this question a lot. You know, how do we talk to the C-suite? My standard answer is the fact that we have organizations talking 2 different languages. Security organizations have grown up talking about security. You talk about, you know, oh, I had 1 billion events last month that turned into 500 million alerts, that turned into 500 incidents, and and that's what we solved, and those are our metrics, and, you know, hurrah, we saved the world. C-suite and the board of directors doesn't care about that, and they don't understand that. You know, for organizations or for government and military organizations, you have a mission that you're trying to accomplish. What's that mission? If you're a commercial organization, it's revenue and shareholder value that they're trying to increase. So how can you relate what you're finding and what you're looking for to those key concepts? So from a dark web perspective, you know, for whatever reason, boards of directors love to have pictures of people, and I think the dark web kind of feeds into that. If you can get a good intel source and be able to throw it up there and be like, this is Jonathan Cooch, he was targeting us last year, we're going to send him to jail, he's going to die, it'll be awesome. You know, those kinds of things really work well. But what works even better, though, is to be able to stand up and be able to say, listen, this is Jonathan Cooch, and he was targeting us. You know, out of those 1 billion things that we worked on last month, you know, he was one of them, and he was targeting this part of our organization that conducts either this mission or generates this kind of revenue for our company. And those are the kind of things that the generals and the admirals and your CEOs and the boards of directors are going to care about, because now you're talking their language. You're talking about protecting revenue, increasing shareholder value, market penetration, those kinds of things. You're relating what's going on out there in the big, bad security world, cybersecurity world, to something that they deal with every day and that they're trying to find solutions to.
Yeah, I think what you're challenged with is convincing the C-suite that what is traditionally an expense item can actually have an ROI. I mean, everything comes down to dollars and cents for corporations. So if you can convince them that you're going to prevent their stock from declining by investing in this area, you have a good shot at getting funded. I also think there are telltale signs in corporations that will give you a clue as to how serious they are about cybersecurity. And one of them is you can tell by just looking at their org chart. So if there is an IT organization with a CIO that reports to the CEO, but there's a security organization with a CISO that reports to the CIO, you've got an uphill battle, because they don't view security as important as the operations of IT in the organization. And whenever we see that, we know we're going to have to sell not only to the CISO, but to the CIO and perhaps to the CFO.
One of the things you are seeing in commercial companies, by the way, just along those lines, is it's coming out, the CINO, the Chief Intelligence Officer, or companies are actually setting this up. It's a great thing for government folks as a secondary job, by the way. But it is moving to where they're trying to raise prominence to the role of intelligence within security and the role just within the company overall.
I think you're seeing that as part of a shift, a broader shift in the industry, right? From kind of thinking of information security as an IT problem, reporting up to the CIO, and now shifting to think of it as a kind of enterprise-wide risk management problem, right? One where, the loss of information can have, can carry systemic risk to the organization, and it could occur through, basically IT-free means. I mean, it could be, in most cases, an insider threat, right? Walking off with data, say insider data, carries this big systemic threat to the company, and there's nothing any IT person would have ever done about it, right? Because maybe that insider was supposed to have access, and all the IT things were checked off, right? I mean, there's another mindset thing more broadly that we talk about, where in an IT environment, you think about your IT help desk, right? You get everything set up, you turn it on, and it works, and you kind of wait for the fire drill, right? You wait for somebody to pull the fire alarm or call the help desk, say it doesn't work. You scramble the troops, you go fix it, and then it's back to working again. In a risk management environment, right? Think, buying fire insurance for your house, right? You don't wait till the fire alarm goes off to buy the fire insurance, right? It's something you recognize as an ongoing posture, where some event is always either has some probability of happening continuously, and maybe already is happening at some level, and you treat it as a risk that you build into your business models, that you buy insurance for, that you treat as something ongoing. And so it's a shift in the mindset, kind of going back to what I was saying about assuming you will be breached, right? Think of it as like the weather, right? We don't sit and count raindrops. We don't freak out every time it drizzles, but we know that sometimes there will be floods, sometimes there will be storms, and you treat it as a systemic, ongoing, low-level risk. You will approach it differently. And so we've seen actually CISOs move from reporting to the CIO to often being in the risk management organization, say reporting to the chief risk officer, or reporting to the CFO, or something like that. And I think that's your point. That's sort of one of the signs of an evolved organization.
Yeah, one of the things we have to look at also is we're talking about rather mature organizations that actually have the infrastructure and the organization, depending on where they are, to actually have a security operations center or actually do something about this. But if you look at the American economy, it's like most companies really aren't that big, that are just at risk. Danny mentioned earlier, it's like the adversaries, they're going to go after the easy targets. The easy targets are the folks that don't even have a CIO, right? Because it's easier to attack. And unfortunately, one of the things you have to deal with, and there's this huge emergence of cybersecurity insurance. That's about all you can tell the CEO. It's like, sorry, dude, your only chance is just to buy insurance because something could happen. It's back to like if you get a discount if you have your fire alarm system, you get a discount. And same thing with cyber insurance. If you don't have any type of protection in place, your rates are going to be higher because you have no protection. There's a mass market out there that's unprotected, and I don't know what the answer is, but it's a reality.
Well, one of the answers is to use MSPs. So you're not having to invest in this technology just for your company, but you can take part in that advanced technology through an MSP. So for mid-size and smaller companies, that's an excellent approach.
Well, that's about all the time we have. Thank you to the panelists, and thank you.